struggle won't be over.
It's really important to know your history because wheels don't need to be reinvented. They need to get like hubcaps, you know, steel radials, you know. But the wheel itself should be already there, and you should be able to recognize it and know that. Um, when I started doing political work, you know, my first demo was when I was in high school. It was exciting to be part of something that was really going. And but that work had been going on as a tradition, you know, it stretched back to the 19th century. Um, you know, and I'm not talking about like 1848 in Paris, you know, that kind of, I mean, 1848, you know, when they had the Paris Commune and all that. I'm talking about like the first labor union work that was done in the United States after the Civil War. In fact, I went to see that play, The Wash, last night about the washerwoman strike here in Atlanta. And it was black women who were laundresses, which is like the lowest of low that you could go and still make a living, except they couldn't because people were not paying them, the white women, you know. So they organized, and eventually they got 800 black women. And then they organized it out some more, and they got 1,500. And then the white washerwomen, who were Irish, basically, came to them and said, we want to be a part of this because we're tired of being exploited too. And that strike, I don't know how long it lasted, like months. And the women thought they were going to be starved out and they would have to give in, but they didn't. And this labor action, which is what it was reported in the press around the country, particularly though in the what we would call the South, and then the North, which had just beaten the South. And people recognize, you know, this is bigger than just these women here. It had to be suppressed. So it was, you know, they beat them and pulled them off of trams and, you know, threw them to the ground and beat them, you know, just, they didn't necessarily have to be a washerwoman, they just had to be black. And it was harder with the Irish because you couldn't really tell, you know. Anyway, the Knights of Labor were seeing this, and the miners were seeing this. And I think it was the election of 1878. I'd have to check. I'm not good with dates. The year or two leading up to it, in the South, they were going to get rid of Reconstruction, you know. And one of the things that they hated was the idea that these mostly women had come down from the North and they taught Negroes. That's not what they called them, but, you know, how to read and write. And that's how they organized. You know, some of these women knew how to read and write. And they could write handbills and signs, you know. Had to put a stop to it. And the thing about, there's a book called 1877 that's really interesting because we think that this election is going to be bloody. That election, which there was almost a successful nationwide strike of the railroads and miners and these people called the Knights of Labor, who the trades, It almost held, but it was put down. The Pinkertons came in and they just killed people. Just okay. You're going to be out there in numbers. Well, we'll just get rid of you. It's very. Anyhow, it was all part of this sort of interlocking that made the guys who were in charge of things, the white guys, very nervous because, okay, slavery's over, but we have to keep sharecroppers. We have to, you know, have that kind of labor. And by 1877, they were just doing stuff that was incredible. And when it came to actual voting in the South, they started doing redeemers. That was the beginning of it. And what it is that was the cause, the lost cause of the South. Oh, it wasn't slavery. No, it was just a way of life. Whereas when the secessionists were writing about why they were doing it, it was very clear it was slavery. We have to keep slavery, and we have to keep going further west with slavery. And a lot of it, yes, was economic. You know, the forces in the North defeating the forces in the South because they wanted to suck what they had out too. But and I don't know if I'm actually being clear about this or not, but at the end, after Lee surrendered, the generals who were head of the combatants in the South, they all thought they were going to be hung, you know, because they lost the war. They showed up like in their really, really resplendent uniforms. And Andrew Johnson was not Abraham Lincoln, and he was totally down with their cause, basically. And they were not executed. And they were able to eventually run for office and hold positions of power. Even though you had to say that you supported the Constitution of the United States. They didn't even say that, you know. They were not repentant in any kind of way. And that's why, like, the washerwomen's strike was really important. But, so that is the last quarter of the 19th century. So there's a lot of unrest and, you know, like the Haymarket and all of these things. And you come into the 20th century and you have like Italians who have come in. And everyone knew that Italians were anarchists. You know? And some of them were, but, you know. So if Italians stepped out of their enclaves, then they were liable for attack. And there was this really great exhibit at the King's Center, man, years ago. And it's this gay man who had this collection of pamphlets, cards, photographs of lynchings in the South. And we saw pictures of Italian anarchists, whatever, who had come south to organize, and they were there, you know, hanging with black bodies. And by the time that World War I comes into being, already there have been demonstrations, there have been fighting in the street, there have been a great deal of agitation, and there were some places where, you know, things had improved. But who was Eugene Debs, I think? Well, he was put in jail and he ran for the presidency. And, you know, of course, he didn't gain like that big a following there right after World War I. But in 1932, the Socialist Party got almost 1 million votes, 750,000, because people were pretty sure capitalism was not the answer, because capitalism had caused this depression. And the depression was worse than the panics. That's what they used to call it. And panics, I can't remember how many there were. But as you got closer to the turn of the 20th century, they came more panics. And then 5 years later, it would be another panic. And, people would lose everything, because they'd be run on banks. And it was important to organize so that you could get better pay. And you didn't have to work 60 hours a week, which is what it was. It came down to 52 in some places. The International Ladies Garment Union, whatever the hell, IGLTU, I can't remember the exact name now, but they did a lot of organizing. And then after the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, people who had money, women, said, oh my God, we can't have this. These people were locked in. They were paid by this little piece. They had to work all these hours. They got it, that there was exploitation. And actually, Francis Perkins, who became Roosevelt's, FDR's, in labor, Department of Labor, the only woman in the cabinet, she was attending a meeting of suffragists, well-heeled ones. And they could hear something going on, and they could see to the factory. And they saw bodies falling, and it made an indelible impression. She was already working as the head, I think, of the Department of Labor, or social whatever, for New York State. And that's how FDR knew her, because, he was head of the Navy. And by World War I, and he was governor of New York. Yeah, I think so. And so that's how he knew her and knew her work. And she basically said, well, look, we're going to have to pass legislation like 40-hour work week, and we're going to have to take care of people who have nothing, because people were literally starving in the street, at the onset of the Depression. And before that, of course, anti-Italian, you had Sacco and Vanzetti. Sacco and Vanzetti, I think his name. Can't remember now. And that was a rallying cry for people around the world. But particularly the Reds, communists, socialists, people who were interested in the rights of black people, the rights of women, the right to have a voice, even though your government didn't like the voice. And then the Scottsboro Boys, so those are two very big ones. And, there's all this labor stuff happening at the same time. And, the Depression just made a difference. But back up and go to World War I, and so many men were being drafted that then women had to step in and do work that ordinarily they wouldn't. Like driving trams, wouldn't do that before. Of course, when in Europe, they would drive ambulances, And actually, there's a whole lesbian cadre over there, but that's a different story. And by the time that was over, all of the suffragist work that had happened, and then the sort of unstoppable force of women doing non-traditional things, eventually women got the right to vote. You know, that's how it happened. Unfortunately, we also got temperance, which that's how we got organized crime. That's how, police were totally bought off. People made their own alcohol out of terrible things. And there was a thing called Jake legs or shaky legs. And if you drank enough bad alcohol, it disturbed your central nervous system. So a lot of people lost the ability to walk, the ability to speak, the ability to work, even if there weren't jobs. And no one was taking care of this. And there were signs that something bad was coming because, we had panics. Although the panic of, oh God, was it 1908 something? J.P. Morgan actually put a stop to it. He and a few of his banker friends and very wealthy people had telephones, which nobody else had. And he called all of his buddies and said, look, this is bad. Things are going from bad to worse. We're going to put money into the banks. People can get their money out. We're going to stop this. And they did. That panic was a lot less severe than the others had been. But also, see, about World War I is numbers of people of the same sex were put together. And they lived cheek by jowl, or they worked right next to each other in a factory, or, So for the first time, queers were seeing other queers, like it wasn't so unusual, it wasn't so bad, and a lot of times people looked away because things had to be done, and that was the beginning of a shift in queer life in the United States, also in Europe, but and then through the 1930s, not only were, healthcare and, a stipend so you could live being accorded to people, that was done by the federales now because of Roosevelt. But people said, okay, we're going to make sure that somebody who works is going to make enough money that they can live on it, at least. And that's when you get, oh God, what is his name? Samuel Gompers and these various people, doing sit-down strikes inside the automotive factories, just all of this agitation that was kind of successful. And then when World War II was coming on to the scene, the United States, of course, was not involved until Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. But up until that time, we called ourselves the Fortress of Democracy. So this country started making a lot of warships and planes even that the Allies would purchase, except they didn't have the money to purchase it. So, that had to work on both sides of the pond. Actually, in World War I, we lent money to the Allies, and then we demanded it back after the war. They couldn't give it to us. Their economies were prostrate. So what they did was they got reparations from the Germans. and the Germans gave it to the Allies gave it to the United States. In 1926, 24, 26, John Maynard Keyes, who actually was queer, looked at what was happening financially. He said, you know, if this goes on, there's going to be another war because Germany can't live like this. And he was right. You know, Germany had incredible unrest, not just labor, everybody. It was a time of, you know, very transformative things. And if there had been money, we wouldn't have had the Nazis. They wouldn't have been able to rise to power. But there was not money. You know, people were, they said, oh, freedom, freedom to starve. And there were pitched battles in the streets, like the SA, the brown shirts, and the communists. And, you know, Magnus Hirschfeld is in the middle of this. You know, and that's a whole queer story history, but he had made a film different from the others. And that was the early 1920s, I think. And they were showing it in Vienna, with civilized Vienna. Vienna was, you know, a heartland of culture. You know, he was almost beaten to death. And some papers said, oh, he's dead, you know. But he wasn't, he recovered. But that was because they showed that film. Conrad Veidt was in it, the one who was the somnambulist in that cabinet of Dr. Caligari. That, you know. So, and Henry Gerber, who was in Berlin after World War I, as part of administering things, he saw the sexology that was going on and how well respected Magnus Hirschfeld was, and all the things that were possible sexually. And he came back to the United States, and he formed SIR, Society for Individual Rights. I think it was 1926, 24, I don't know. Dates elude me. And this Society for Individual Rights was actually given a charter in the state of Illinois. He's from Chicago. And it was explicitly for an organization for homosexual men. By then we had homosexuality, you know, as an identity opposed to the acts that people performed. When it was discovered, like, what exactly SIR was, because they had newsletter that went out, you know, and they talked about same-sex love, not in graphic detail, you know, it was like, he lost his job at the post office and he was imprisoned. So that was it for the organized queer stuff for a while in the United States. But meanwhile, you know, a lot of people who had found that, you know, same-sex love, same-sex ideas and identities, you know, during World War I, were not completely okay about going back into the closet. And there was agitation. And people talk about the Harlem Renaissance as a place where, you know, queerness was not only accepted, but, you know, it was just like right out there. Well, that's true. But there were black queers who said, I'm not being in the United States anymore. I saw what it was like in France. I know I could go there and have a different life. And so they did. And there was a woman called Bricktop. She was, kind of high yellow and she had red hair, hence Bricktop. And she had a club there in Paris. And that's where a lot of queers of all kinds, all nations, but particularly black ones, came. And that was one of the places in the 1920s where that's where people were. So, I mean, there's a lot of history and culture that, people just don't know. For instance, how did Puerto Ricans get citizenship light with the United States? In the Spanish-American War, there was still a Spanish Empire, although there had been a lot of agitation for independence by definite, people who were organized and had militaries, and like the reason you have a country called Bolivia is because of Simon Bolivar. And actually his right-hand man there was a guy named Bernardo O'Higgins, because his dad was from Ireland and his mother was indigenous. And they fought the Spanish. So before the Spanish-American War, there were people who had thrown off the yoke of the Spanish Empire. And there were others, like Cuba and Puerto Rico, where the agitation had begun. They were trying to, but, like my aunt told me, I guess it was in the 1880s, 1890, a great uncle of hers had to leave Puerto Rico because of his agitation, get away from. So I guess I kind of inherited it. I don't know. But the Spanish-American War made Spain give up all of its empire, and then we got it. And actually, I have a book. It's really interesting. William Jennings Bryan was the editor, and it's called Republic or Empire. Are we a republic or are we an empire? Do we own things? Because we got Puerto Rico, we got Cuba, we got the Philippines, we got Guam. And the U.S. doesn't want to give it up, right? And World War I happens, and they needed cannon fodder. So Puerto Rico, because it's a small island, not like Cuba, they made them U.S. citizens, but they couldn't vote in the presidential election, and they didn't have to pay federal taxes. But there's a lot of history there. But anyhow, a lot of them went overseas to fight, and that changed things somewhat in the island. But the Catholicism was so deeply rooted that there wasn't great change, until later. My grandmother was the first city councilwoman on the island, and it was Humacao, which is this town. It was really a town then. That her people had been in for generations. We don't even know, like, everybody who came or when they came, And during the Depression, she advocated for birth control, which was not popular with the Catholicism that was there. She came to hate priests. The only time that she would really go to church or have to do things was christenings and weddings, that kind of thing. after she got married, it was different. But so, I'm kind of proud of those things. Um, Anything that I did was okay with her. I don't know if she would have been okay with me being queer, but she died when I was 16. So we'll never know. Um, so, history is like a vortex, things just come into it, and then pour out, and it's different than it was going in, you know. Okay. Well, people ask me where I'm from. I've lived in a lot of places. And being in a military family, I was an Air Force brat, you move around. But when I was coming into consciousness of like myself and the world, we were living in Puerto Rico. And that's also when you start noticing. I think I went over when I was about 6, 7. Start noticing men and women, And macho culture is so ingrained that you really saw it close up. There was macho culture in the military. You know. My dad was a captain in the Air Force, and he was a pilot. He flew KC-135s, which were the planes that carried the fuel. So the B-52s, which are the bombers, could let basically a pipe down, and you hook it up with, they call it the male end and the female end, because this is how they do things the world over. Like with your garden hose, you have the male end, the female end, and your electrical current is delivered, with a wire that you hook up. You plug it in. There, that's the male end, and the receptacle is the female end. Oh, and let me say this: how do you remember the way that a 6-cylinder inline engine fires? Okay, so it's 1, 5, 3, 6, 2, 4. Okay. Well, how do you know that? Well, they say 15 is too young, 36 is too old, 24 is just right. So, and how do you, before capacitors, which is one of the things that works with transistors that makes modern day electronics possible, you used to have to be able to read the capacitance, that measurement of how it functioned, and I think it was black, brown, orange, violet, gray, and white. So these would be painted, look like painted, but it's little bands on this little part. And how do you remember? It's black boys rape our young girls, but violet gives willingly. And so not just sexist, but racist. And a guy in my electronics class, because I took a class to become an apprentice electronics person at MARTA, didn't like that. He was a Jehovah's Witness, and he's a black. He was a good buddy of mine, Ernie. So he wrote, "Blackberries run over your garden." Let's see. Very, very well. So that's like getting all the colors. And if you remembered that, you could remember the colors. So you don't have to learn black boys, you know. But this, you know, men running the world, these are the kind of things that are just ordinary every day, you know.
You had very little information.
Right. We expected to go to war, you know, like any time. So, well, one of the things was that the B-52 bombers had nuclear bombs on them. And they were flying over the United States. They were flying over the Pacific. They were flying almost into Russian space and flying back and flying over Europe. And every once in a while, one of the bombs would get lost, you know, and cause quite a kerfluffle. So, you know, like, so we knew we just gonna go to war, you know. So the nuclear thing, that was just there, you know, it was like in the background stuff. And we lived on the Air Force base, but my grandmother lived in San Juan, well, Santurce, actually. And so every other week, my father would drive us to Santurce, and it was old PR2, which is followed the old railroad lines to get the coffee and the sugar to the processing plants. Okay. And it took hours to go, like 30 miles, whatever it was. It was not 30 to 50 miles, I think, not long. Because Puerto Rico is a small island, you know, with 100 by 35, something like that. Okay. So, but we were on very far west, and then we had to come pretty far east. Anyhow, so we would be there for a weekend, sometimes a long weekend, with my grandmother. We stayed at her apartment, which was one of those fabulous Spanish-inspired apartment buildings. You know, there was 4 floors. She was on the top floor, and as you went up the steps, it had the inlaid tiles, you know, and you know it had the tiles on the main landing, and then you entered, you know, double doors, and she had bookshelves on either side, and then you have the living room, and the dining room is, you know, not, there was no divider between them. And there was this great porch that wrapped around, and then there was a bedroom and a bathroom and another bedroom and a bathroom in the kitchen. And my brother and I, my brother's 2 years younger than I, we thought it was fabulous because you could look out on the street and there'd be people in the street and stuff. And my grandmother didn't have a car, and she would want to take us places, though, and my parents would go do something else. And so you had to get the bus. And, you know, they said, okay, this is at stop 18, and this is at stop 22, and that's on this main drag, Fernando Juncos. And while I was there, I was observing people, you know, like men and women, and what happened. And those machos are like, tss, 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 ay, mamita, ay, preciosita. Tss, tss. And that play for colored girls who have considered suicide when the rainbow is enough. Okay. She talked about you are on a street with raving lunatics. It was like that. And I can remember I was probably 10 years old, and my father and my mother and I and my brother were driving down some street, main drag, and the street scene was that there was a woman, what I would call pleasingly plump, you know, Rubenesque, with a bun that was perfect, a lot of makeup but not bad, a lot of jewelry, high heels. And there was a man who's kind of a little bit off behind her, and another one before her, and she's pushing him off, you know, like in his chest. You know, and my mother said, those men fighting over that woman. And I was kind of like, yeah. It's like, I can see that. And I can remember I was probably 11 years old, and my mother drove us to Aguadilla, which is the city outside of the gate there at the Air Force Base. And it's what you would call a dry goods place. And so I was eager to go there because they might have the newest Beatle record. You know, I was mad about the Beatles. And as I was waiting on the sidewalk for her to finish, a couple of guys were doing that thing, always holding their crotch. Ay, mamita, preciosita. And I was like, there's no woman here, you know. But I was tall enough, even though I didn't have any tits yet, so they would go through this thing. And we moved back to the States when I was 12, maybe 13, 12. And the summer when I was 14, my parents sent me to stay with my grandmother for a month. You know. And I'm so glad I got to do that because, you know, we connected more. You know. I mean, she always loved me, like, to pieces. But, and, you know, we'd be out in the street and all that crazy stuff. And then I had tits, you know. And I was like, I hate this. You know, I feel like I'm being attacked, which I was, you know. There's a continuum, you know, from like looking to speaking to acting, you know. And they were definitely going to that acting. It's going to be the next thing. But, so, you know, this is where I learned my chops, anyway. And in Puerto Rico, everything is political because that's how it is. And you can't not be political because everything's political. And you belong to a certain political party. And, you know, the populares were the ones who wanted to stay as a commonwealth because there were benefits from being a commonwealth of the United States. You know, like you get federal programs, you know, like cupones, food stamps, you know. And those were a form of currency. You could buy anything with a coupon. And my grandmother actually hated El Plan Johnson. That's what it was. When his war on poverty came, because she was a supervisor in the Department of Law. And her office, though, was like next to La Casa Blanca, which is the White House, where the governor was. You know. And she was just furious because these girls in her office, they would type maybe 8 letters. And El Plan Johnson, you know, they didn't think they had to do anymore. And she couldn't enforce something. That infuriated her, you know. But I will say You know, we used to go to Old San Juan like every time we would go visit my grandmother because my brother and I just loved it, you know. And we'd go to the old Spanish forts and, you know, like all this stuff. And there was a fruit stand in this one plaza, and they had a guy who was always there at his stand, and you would get an orange, and he'd do this little thing, and it would peel the outside, and then you would get the juice. We loved that. But there were always beggars there. And there were beggars like, you know, a guy who lost his legs from here on down. He had a little cart, basically, pulled himself around in. I felt really sorry for him. And, you know, there were others, there were regulars, you know. And I would beg my parents for change to give to them because I felt sorry for them. And my father was like, you know, because this is how he grew up. I mean, so anyhow, but everything's politicized and the political parties. And I got it. I got it in some ways. And I started to like look at Life magazine, you know, look at the civil rights movement. The Air Force was integrated, you know, at that point. You might see these kids at school. You might see guys at the officers club, you know. It was treated as not a big deal, although there are a lot of Southerners in the military. And I'm sure there were clashes or whatever, but I never knew it. And so I'm looking at these pictures of these, you know, how can this be? Why are they being bitten by these dogs? And why are these fire hoses on them? I mean, what is this? And then when the 4 girls were bombed in Birmingham, there was a picture in the magazine that was a pile of rubble and a little girl's patent leather shoe on the top. And I said, oh my God, I have shoes just like that. Why did they blow up little girls? It didn't make sense. And so I'm like trying to get information, you know, I'm doing different things, and a lot of it was not forthcoming where we were. Even the television is La Cadena Telemundo, you know, it's the Spanish-speaking TV, and then there was the base TV, which was really horrible. But, you know, and then somehow I read Silent Spring, you know, Rachel Carson's book. And that came out in what, 64? No, 62, because I was 12 when I read it. And Silent Spring, okay, I get it. I really got it. Because during the rainy season, these guys would come around the streets driving a truck and fogging with DDT. And the kids would go into it and jump around, and we call it Mr. Smokey. You know, like, so all that stuff is stored in my fat cells, you know. And I read that book and I said, crap, this is bad for the birds. This got to be bad for us. And so I stopped doing that. I would go into the bathroom and shut the louvers until they were gone. And you know how the women would gather around the kitchen table talking, you know. So my mother had some friends, they'd do that. And I said, and I read this book. And they're like, what is it with this kid? When I was 12 years old, I didn't think about these things. You know. When then we packed up and came to the States, and we were in Plattsburgh, New York. So go from a tropical island to a town that's 13 miles from the Canadian border. snow, like snow. There were drifts that were knee high. It's like, what the fuck? How can people live like this? And then, we were in a parochial school again. And I had been in a parochial school before we got to Puerto Rico. And it was the same thing. Ms. Dolan, you are a bold lady. Because I was not like the other girls. I had independent thoughts and I would express them. Or I was do what I was told, but it was obvious that I didn't like it. And, I was this exotic thing that was suddenly in their midst. So I'm like, it can't always be this way because I've seen pictures, I've seen movies. And I found a little bookstore in downtown Plattsburgh, and they had Ramparts magazine, which is a leftist journal, is what they thought of it. And I saw people doing political things, and the war was one of the things that they were concerned with. And I knew kids' fathers who were going to war, in Southeast Asia. And I'm thinking, I wonder do this, and it's like, oh, these are countries that, are not like the Philippines or Guam or something like that, still part of the U.S. empire. These are countries where people want to be on their own. They want to be in their own country. They don't want us. And I think, this is bad. This has got to be bad. And there was no one to talk to about it. The kids at school weren't really interested, But
Hold that thought. So there was obviously, you were wired for rebellion.
I was. And they were hippies now. And this seemed like where I wanted to be. I didn't want to be here with parents who were trying to stuff me into a bottle and, like a leg would come out or, and just my head would pop up because I wanted the world, I read things that no kids were reading, and sometimes, of course, you raise your hand in class if the nun asked you something, and I would be the only one raising my hand sometimes. Sometimes it's 3 or 4 others, interested or not in various things, history sometimes. And then I got this attitude from several, particularly boys, and that is, you think you're the smartest person in the room. Well, I actually didn't think that because I knew there were people smarter than me, and I knew there were people who had more information because they had access to it in a way that I didn't because I was a kid. So there was a lot of hostility to me because I was something different. And they had been going to the same school with each other since kindergarten, I was like, get me out of here. Well, they got me out of there. We moved to Omaha, Nebraska. Offutt Air Force Base was the central nerve system for Strategic Air Command, which is what my dad was. And he started working in the command post. And he would come home and you couldn't ask him about his work because it was secret. One time he said, well, working on manuals on how to go to war. Like, okay. And I'm thinking, well, maybe we shouldn't be going to war, you know. And there was, you know, the hippie thing, you know, I got busted for smoking pot. And that was really like, you know, they're going to squeeze you into a towel. And, you know, I mean, I got beaten a lot, you know, as a kid. And then, you know, as an early adolescent, because they're trying to, you know, beat the crazy out of me, beat whatever out of me. Um, so, you know, I was busted for pot, and then, you know, we went to Offutt Air Force Base, Omaha, and I started getting to know kids who also didn't like the war and thought it was wrong. Just a couple, you know, a couple. And there was the moratorium for the Vietnam War. And one of the things that you could do to show it is to wear a black armband. So I wore that at school. Well, principal's office, Mrs. Dolan, do you know? It's like, oh my God, all this drama. And I had, you know, I'd never dated because I was too weird, you know, to be dating. But then I had a boyfriend, kind of, you know, he's talked about things, and he moved to California, some Air Force base, I don't know. And we were corresponding, and said, you know, I'm going to turn 18 because he was older than I was. I don't want to get drafted. I want to go to Canada. So we made plans to run away together to Canada. And I got busted because my parents read my mail, which I didn't think would be a thing. I don't know what I thought, you know, too stupid to do things. And my father's on the phone to his father, and you know, your son is going to dodge the draft. And his father was like, I think they were just making up stuff, you know. My father was really taken aback by that, you know, that attitude. So I was grounded for most of a year. And then my senior year, I was put in an all-girls Catholic school, okay, because it would get me away from these bad influences. And then Lisa Sirko and I would go to her car every day at lunch and smoke hash. Yeah, I met a couple of really good friends that I stayed friends with for years. With, you know, in the Air Force, you just didn't really keep up with people too much. And, you know, they were against the war and stuff. So, anyhow, a friend that I had made at the bad school, you know, her boyfriend was in the Air Force, but he hated it. He joined because he didn't want to get drafted. And the three of us would go around hanging out together, and we went to a demo against the Vietnam War my senior year of high school. And that was my first demo. And when I was in college, I started to go to them. And William Shockley, the inventor of the transistor, and racist as fuck, but I didn't know, you know. He was speaking at Yale. And I had a friend at school at Albertus, which is my college, Albertus Magnus, women's Catholic college named for a 13th century misogynist. Sure, why not? And I had a friend at school, Hajara, who was Nigerian and a Muslim. And I said I was going to go because I believed in freedom of speech. And she was furious. And she said, so he has the idea that I shouldn't exist, which I didn't think that's what he said. He was doing that bell curve thing. And it was clear to me, Hajara was not like there. She was here. You know? One of the reasons why we liked each other was because we liked to get information and talk about things. You know? And I was really getting to be a hippie, you know, and doing a lot of smoking dope and having a lot of sex, you know, different things. And she said, and you're going to go see this man who says that I can't exist. And I thought, freedom of speech, she can't exist. Speech can't exist. It was a conundrum. But eventually what I did is I went down there and I protested his presence. Okay. And so that was my first civil rights thing, like actually a thing. And I was elected vice president of the student body there 2 years in a row. And my slogan was, I know everything there is to know about vice. And, you know, kind of, and I had to put out a newsletter. As well as I was the one who decided who got money, you know, from the fees. You know. So, okay, bring these people to speak. Leave those people alone, kind of thing. You want to form this club? Okay, not that one, whatever. So, the more information I was getting, the more I was opposed to the war, which was like one of the main things at the time. And also civil rights. You know, it's like, okay, you know, black people can do this, can do that, but there's something called Jim Crow. And, I mean, look at our student body, you know. So, you know, I began putting this stuff out. And it became quite controversial. But they elected me the second time, you know. So, that was me trying to be in or have part of a community that made sense to me. And Albertus was just 2 miles down Prospect Street. The girls, we always thumbed a ride down there. And you were there at Woolsey Hall, which is Yale. And then there's Yale, the ice hockey rink, you know, sports stuff. And these were where they did experiments on animals, you know, things. There was school music. There were, you know, there were 12 colleges at Yale. And they still had mixers, which was originally when the girls from the 7 sister colleges that are all girl came to Yale to meet boys who were in the Ivy League. So this is the perpetuation of the class. You know, this is a ruling class. Now, they would give the organizing committee in each college, they would give them $500 and a bag of dope and say, well, here, you know, have your mixer. And a lot of times they would have this band called the Rockets. And they were rockers, you know, and I was in a group of girls called the Dirty Mothers, as we called them. And every dirty motherfucker gets his, you know, that kind of thing. And we would go down there to the mixers and dance our asses off and, you know, drink beer and there was one college where all these guys were going to be doctors. So they would order these huge tanks of nitrous oxide, and there'd be a mask. And so you'd be dancing like that. And if you're taking LSD, like a lot of times I did, that was wild. That's how a lot of it was. It was wild and open. And after just like half a year, I'm thinking, these guys are the future masters of the world here. They're going to rule the class and everything. These guys can't even get laid, you know. I mean, it's pathetic. No wonder this country's gone to hell. That's what I'm thinking, you know.
At 1920. I said at 1920, you're thinking the country's going to hell.
Yeah, I thought about a bunch of places. 1971 was when I went to Albertus. And I learned a lot.
Is that where you got into the CGA there?
No, that was
that was
graduate school. I thought I was just sick of Albertus, sick of New Haven, although I liked New Haven. My grandmother was there, you know, all that. And there were a lot of things that were good about Yale that you could attend, you know, like lectures and concerts, and, you know. It always surprised me, you know, he'd be talking to someone, he seemed halfway intelligent, and there were so many books he hadn't read, you know, like ideas he wasn't conversant with. And I'm like, future leaders of USA, oh my God. But anyhow, I decided, you know, real world itis, like, what am I going to do? Okay, I'm going to get out of college here. Where am I going to go? I mean, you know, I'd already, while I was in college, waitressed, and I worked in a coffin factory. And you never know when something will come in handy. It's one of the reasons why I think you should just do it, you know. And I made caskets for a living. And it was obvious that at one time this had been a sweatshop, okay? But now there were overhead lights and there was air conditioning. So they didn't have to open the windows and all that. And when people started dying, you know, the first plague years, you'd go to the wake and no one knows what to say at a wake anyways, but particularly, I mean, usually people look really bad, you know. I mean, one time I had a good friend, Mike, and, you know, he just looked like somebody let all the air out of his tires, you know, just anyhow. But I was surprised at, you know, what was it, like 20 years later? No, 10. No. I graduated in 75, and people started dying in where I was in like 85. And, you know, I was in Atlanta, and I'd go to the casket, and you don't really know what to say. And I said, well, you know, I used to work in a coffin factory. And, you know, it's really amazing how the styles haven't changed that much, which they hadn't. And I would say, now this is a number 14. You know, and you see the gimp, which is the braided trim along the edges. You would have, you know, the satin covering or whatever, and then the gimp is, you know, how you hide that you had tacked it up. And sometimes there was a little decoration, you know, whatever. This is number 14. This is really well made. A lot of times it wasn't, but, you know, you don't say that. And then the grieving spouse, you know, would say, oh, well, you know, I went to the undertakers, you know, twice because I really wanted to see, and I spent hours looking for this casket, and I'd go, yes, you know, and So I had information that was useful, you know. Before that, you know, when I went to grad school, that's why I didn't know what to do. I certainly didn't want to waitress or go back to the coffin factory. So, you know, grad school. I'll go to grad school, and I got accepted to the Department of Radio, TV, and Motion Picture because my degree was in mass communications. Okay. And I was in Chapel Hill in one of the dorms, and after a week, I realized I'd made a terrible mistake. This is not what I want to do. Meanwhile, Lorraine had one semester that she had to finish before she got her degree. So she was in New Hampshire. And, you know, I was lonely. I didn't know anybody, didn't have anything. And I saw a little thing on a bulletin board for the Carolina Gay Association. So I said, well, I'll give them a call, you know. And I met Howard Fradkin. Actually, when the first time the quilts were laid out in 1987 on the mall, I found his. I didn't realize he'd bought it. But so they were happy that they had this woman in the gay association, because it was all guys before then. And he wanted to do public things. So, you know, he would organize talking to classes, or he organized a day-long seminar, you know, and I would do stuff with them. And he told me about TALF, which is Triangle Area Lesbian Feminist Alliance. And so I started going to TALF. And that was, it changed me, you know. It's like, oh, here's these women doing like feminist political things, you know. I had not been around that before. But when Lorraine came to North Carolina, the Department of Radio, TV, and Motion Pictures said, sayonara, baby, because I needed to pass 2 courses that they said I hadn't really had before where I was, which I hadn't. And one of them, the professor's name was Dick. I can't remember his last name. And Dick was like, okay, if you fuck me, or you know, whatever, I will pass you. It was a pass-fail. But if you don't, I will fail you. And I said, well, I'm not going to do that. No. And so I failed. And they said, don't come back no more. And I had to get an apartment in Durham. I got it, you know, I'd been living in Chapel Hill. And Lorraine came to live with me there. And we had to figure out what to do. Now, I had gotten my tuition back for that semester that I was not going to be there. And I went and bought a motorcycle because it needed transportation. And I went there, a Honda dealer, and I said, okay, if I buy this, will you show me how to drive it? Because I didn't know. I knew how to drive a stick shift, but so he showed me for about half an hour, and I took off. That was it. I think it was $600 then. And Lorraine had the idea that we would go to Atlanta to Alpha, which she had heard about, I had heard about. Because I'd been thinking, I don't know, I got friends in Boston, you know, I didn't want to be where it was cold. And we went to a party at Alpha. I think I've told you this. And I was like, oh, a lot of women here, you know, nice. A lot of beer to drink, which I did in that period of time. and I played poker and I won, which I'm a terrible poker player. So I said, well, this is a sign. We're going to move here, which was her idea all along, but she didn't want to insist because she wanted it to be what I thought, you know. So we got a U-Haul, put the motorcycle and my record collection, and came to Atlanta and got a room in a rooming house at 5th and Piedmont. And that was when Midtown was just coming up, because all these gay men had bought these old Victorians and stuff and were renovating them. You know, so they bought them very cheaply. And we were on the second floor, and we had windows like this around the room, $21 a week. And she got a job at the Biltmore Hotel. And, you know, she was doing maintenance there. It was their EEO program, you know, resurrecting, you know, finally having a woman doing that kind of work. And I couldn't find anything, and so finally I took a job as a security guard at Hormel and Tucker, guarding little hams and, you know. And when I saw what they do to make processed meat, I said, no processed meat ever again. Okay. And so that eventually led to vegetarianism, but, you know, that's another story. So I would ride my motorcycle to Hormel, and I began, you know, socializing with women at Alpha. And Chris Carroll, my wife, had been at Duke. And Chris is a smart girl, you know, she got scholarships and whatever. And she became a member of TALF, of course. And she moved to Atlanta about the same time that Lorraine and I moved to Atlanta. So I knew her, you know. And some of the women at Alpha decided to get together and form a women's music production company. And like I said, you know, at Atlanta, you know, you just think of something and then go do it. So we did everything. We contracted the talent, which was women's music, but that meant lesbian, like Meg Christian, Teresa Trull, Margie Adams, you know, like all these famous in the community talent. And we learned to run the boards. We did the advertising. You know, this really everything. And that's where I met Margot, who I became involved with, and that was life-changing. Meanwhile, Chris thought I was hot, but she also thought I was a hot dog, which I kind of was. So, you know, I'm like really trying to find my feet, you know, because a lot of things had been in my head. And then, you know, like it's in my crotch and my tits and everything, and my whole body, I would give it over to dancing, you know. And so we knew each other for probably 20 years before we got involved. You know, we were friends, but not like close friends, you know. Actually, when Chris called Jane Seville and, God, what is her name? I'm blanking. I don't know why. She was with Jane for a long time. She started the lesbian and gay, what became a department almost over there at Emory. Sarah Lynn Chestnut, yeah, they were together. And Jane got a call, and Chris said, well, I started seeing someone. Oh, who is it? Maria Elena Dolan. And Sarah went, yes, yes. Because it was going to change Chris's life. And it did. But, so,
Let's back up. Just
well, I was like the only lesbian in Alpha who would like go to these things like repeatedly because the men were sexist. And their idea, and this is true for pretty much everyone who is part of the dominant culture, whatever the culture is, you know. They say, well, I'm one of the good guys. You know, I'm not prejudiced. You know. And these faggots, you know, because faggots, what I call them, didn't think they were sexist. You know, I'm one of the good guys. I love women. I love lesbians. Yeah, okay. And what do you do to work on yourself because you need to, and also change the world because that's what we are supposed to be doing, okay? To make queer things accessible and visible and have them say, okay, we can't deny that you're there and we'll have to accommodate you to some extent. Okay, you need the input from everyone and you need to pay attention and you need to not talk over a woman. You need to not tell the woman what she thinks, you know. Oh, you don't think that. Oh, women just, no, no, no. Well, with lesbians, it's like, you think you're one of the good guys, you know. You want to make the world safe for lesbians and for other oppressed groups, you know, if you know something about politics, okay? Because most of the women at Alpha were white and middle class or professional class, you know. Like, oh yes, we have a couple of Jews, and there's one black woman, you know, and one Latina, but, you know, that does not make a movement, okay? That is a thrust of a movement, but that is not a movement. And that was very hard for a lot of women to take in. We had a day-long workshop with different elements on racism, okay? And, you know, like most of the women felt really good after that. Wow, I learned a lot. And the one black woman who was there and giving information and stuff, said, okay, are we bullshitting ourselves? Are we bullshitting ourselves? Well, yes, okay. But there had been some civil rights dykes, you know, who had gone from, you know, civil rights to anti-war to civil rights, you know. And they said, you know, this is not good, you know. We need to get to a place where a woman of color could come in here and not feel oppressed, you know. And that was hard. That was hard because, you know, you have to figure it out yourself as the oppressor. And you have to understand that you are one. And like with me, I have white skin privilege. So my friend Aida, who speaks perfectly good English, you know, but she has darker skin, has a different time of it when she enters a room as opposed to when I do. And what do you do about it? Now there are a lot of things that you can do. There are things you can read. There are workshops you can take and stuff. And it was hard then because there weren't that many women who you could learn from, you know. And so what I did was I inserted myself into black spaces and I became friends with black women. In fact, there was one night Bell Hooks was speaking, and Chris and I were sitting together, and some of my black friends came over. Hey, how you doing? Oh, see you doing? No. So normal. And Chris said, "But it's you and every black dyke in Atlanta." I'm like, and that is racist. The way that you notice that. And, you know, there are all these moments. And I'm in them a lot of times. I have just tried to work on myself. You know, we talk about that, and I wish that there was a wall behind my head and I could go bang, bang, bang. That is the kind of thing that makes you never want to organize anything ever again, you know? There are several hoses that connected there, you know. So there were lesbians who were used to organizing things, you know, like not just me. Jerry Cagle was one. Susan Barrett, who was her lover, was another one. God, I can see faces, but I can't put names to them. Anyhow, one of the guys was Tom Carr, who actually was one of the good guys. Was actually, and he had been at UNC when I was there, and he said, "Oh, UNC. Most of my time, I just suck cock in Wilson tea room. Wilson is the library, and
Who's the little guy that keeps coming out and spraying stuff on me?
okay. So I liked him, you know. Some of the women were like, "Oh my God, I can't stand this." You know, I was like, "Okay, he's a fag. He likes dick." You know, I'm just sorry that we don't have something comparable. You know, like kidding, but you know, not really. I mean, I would pick up women. It wasn't that hard, you know. But you don't do it like through a glory hole, you know. Not that. I don't think I would do that. Anyhow, he was a stalwart in doing this, as well as a couple other guys. And we had to get down to the nitty gritty, you know. What exactly are we going to provide for people here? You know? Who is going to do a workshop on racism? Who is going to do a workshop on health care? It's like mostly for women, you know. Workshop in, you know, queers of the past, but it's always like Shakespeare and Michelangelo and, you know, the things in the 20th century didn't get a lot of shrift, you know, short shrift. So, you know, big workshop on ERA because we were in the throes of that at the time. And where are people going to stay? Where are we going to have this? And the not the Biltmore, the Georgian Terrace is where we had it. And that was another run down at heels kind of hotel. So it didn't cost a lot of money. And one of the guys, I mean, we were hard. We just didn't have the money. We were hard trying to raise it. We had fundraisers, but we didn't have enough money to pay for everything that we were putting into place. And the women were cognizant of that. You know, it's like, wait, you guys, back up. If we're going to give money to this and this, you know, we have to think about this. This is how you organize stuff. One guy said, well, we really need to be at the Fox, so we'll be in a big place where we can dance and say, look at us, we are all so beautiful. And we're like, who's going to pay for that? And Leaf, it was his name. I can make phone calls. We're like, and why aren't you making phone calls now? You know, he said, well, you know, this is what I can do. I'm like, oh, God, okay, fine. For ERA, people are saying, okay, we will bring food with us, so we won't buy food in Atlanta. You know, it's like, but you live in a state that doesn't have ERA. You know, it's like, you're like, well, no, we're going to do that. Oh, fine, you know. And I had this, you know, funky little apartment that, you know, had some room. So I had these two strangers come and, you know, sleep on my floor. That's a lot of what we were doing, you know. But the way money was being spent, I don't know what was going to happen, you know. Turns out that the Presbyterians, local ones, every year they have a cause that they support, and they pay all the bills for the cause. They decided that year that they would do things for queers, and so they gave the money to make this all happen. And we could be reimbursed for what we had spent. And Jerry said, I didn't like the way money was being spent, and I didn't spend any of mine. And so I was like, well, I spend it, but I don't really know on what. And I said, I don't know, $10 in long distance phone calls. That was like, but yes, the Presbyterians saved it. However, by the time the conference actually came, we, the women, were so burned out that we could hardly go to anything, you know? Like, I don't even remember the 2 workshops that I went to for the 3 days. I did go to the entertainment at night, which was at the Fox, and it's a group called Red Shoes Walking. Well, when you have red in the title, you think socialist, communist. Oh, okay, you know. These were more people who wanted to be off Broadway, maybe, you know. They had a song in the beginning, Homo Madness, you know, what makes you want to make a quiche, you know, like stuff. And then they had a scene where it was supposed to be Aristotelian drama, you know. So, you know, pity and fear. And the main character was Testicles. You know, he's like big testicles, whatever. You know, and he had the little Chiron, whatever it is. And then there's a scene where supposedly he rapes the woman, you know, like, and she's turning around like this. Well, the lesbians were on their feet. Like, what are you doing? You know. And one of the biggest and baddest lesbians, Sep, was not there. Thank the goddess. You know, I don't know if there would have been bloodshed, but you know, but a lot of us walked out.
But so what I want you to tell the kids today is why do it? It's going to be a
Because
pain
it's
in the ass.
important. Because it is important. What kind of world do you want to live in? No? And yeah, everything really is political, you know? How clean the air is that you breathe, that's politics, you know? You let polluters get away with, you know, polluting your air. That's your lungs that comes into, you know. Smoking cigarettes, that's you with your lungs. Somebody else smoking a cigarette, well, your right to smoke a cigarette ends at my lungs. So don't do it where I have to suffer for it, you know. You have to organize to get this stuff done. You know, it's political how much people get on disability, you know. We have disabled people, you know. It's political whether people can live like in what the Mad Housers do, you know, like these small houses that, you know, you could lock, that you could have your stuff in, that you could have water in and electricity in, okay? And that's not a tent. It's all politics, you know, and this Supreme Court is proving that it's all politics. And what you do is, you know, you stand the fuck up and you say, no. And I hate it that I can't go to demos now because of my brittle bones, which have shattered. I have a steel plate in my foot, and I have all the tendons in the toes cut. Okay? So I can't wiggle my toes. And I have to walk in a way that gets all weird calluses and stuff. I've had both knees replaced. Okay? I had my femur shattered. Here and here is replaced. And this has actually had metal, like leaving where it's supposed to be. So I had a second surgery. I've had this hip replaced. And I had to replace it twice, which was unbelievable. I started to walk and I was hearing this, and it was my hip. Didn't hurt, but you know. I've had my spine rebuilt from the sacrum to T8, okay? And now I'm having all this trouble with these cervicals, but I'm not going to get any more surgery. Oh, and yeah, I've had carpal tunnel surgery. I've had trigger finger, which means, you know, this can't go up of its own accord. When the doctor said that, I said, no, this is my trigger finger, you know, because I have guns. And I had frozen finger here, which everyone thinks you're flipping them off, but no, this because this finger won't go down, you know. And I cannot be in a place where I have to run. I can't run. You know, if the cops are coming, I can't run. Not anymore. It just doesn't work. If somebody bumps into me and I fall down to the ground, I might shatter, okay? So I can't do that. I have to do what I can do from my house, you know? Or I can cheer people on. Like last year's Pride, okay? SAG-AFTRA had a banner, okay? And that's when the strike was on, all right? So I went right in front of them and I said, stay strong, stay strong. And they were like, oh my God, yes, you know. Just doing that made a difference because they felt like seen. They felt seen, okay? Sometimes that's all anyone wants. They just want to be seen. And you can do that, you know. I mean, I have my little walker, and I sat in it. I bring it because I have the seat, and I can walk without falling, okay? I don't want to go down Peachtree Street like that, so I don't go down there. I just stay like where it begins and then go back on the train, you know. And so what I do, things like that, I can do, and I do them. Also, I am a writer, okay? And I'm still a warrior. I am a warrior. So I do things behind the scenes. I write that column for Georgia Voice, These are queers in the past who did things. They said no to whatever was happening, and they did things to change it, okay? And I'm still working on my memoir, and boy, I wish I had done it 10 years ago, because then I could remember things. It's really hard for me now. I can't remember names. That's really troublesome. But, you have vascular dementia. It's not something that they can put a steel plate in for, It's just, it is what it is, and I'm just getting along as I can, and Chris helps me. And she gets...
You got the...
You have to believe at some point you'll find your people. You have to believe at some point you can make a difference. And the difference could be $5 a month to, ZAMI or, some other organization. You can do that. You can, if you're really good on your computer, you could offer your services. Like, I'll put a web page for you, In all probability, when you were growing up, you didn't fit in. You were different. You knew you were different. You might not have known how you were different, but you were different. And you realized that your trajectory might not be what people expected of you. Okay? And sometimes you have to move away to get away from it. I mean, that's one thing about the military. That's why there are a lot of Southerners in it. Not so much anymore, but, it's like, how could you honorably leave your little town in Alabama or Georgia and leave your people behind? The only honorable way to do that would be going to the service. That's what happened for a lot of people. I mean, I used to date this woman, Josie, and she was in the Navy. That's so she could get out of her little town in Louisiana and do something other than what they expected of her. And she found she could have girlfriends in the Navy, What she talked about is her CO, her commanding officer. He thought it was fine. Dykes are fine, and just occasionally give me a blowjob. So she was able to be discharged honorably because she would give her CO blowjobs. But that was her way to get out. She went to live in Louisville. And she lived on not really a farm, because she was sort of in town. It's more like what you have here. Had a lot of land, and she had goats because she was going to be self-sufficient, And she decided that that was not going to be the way, because she took one of the goats to the rending place. So they killed the goat, and they took it the skin and gave her the meat. She said the bag was still warm. She couldn't eat that. So that was it with the goats. But she was trying to do something else. You can do a couple of things. Now you can have a connection with people that you couldn't have before. So you can connect with people around the globe, with your phone. Okay. That's not my thing. In fact, I only got a Facebook page 2 months ago, and that's because somebody made me do it, basically. Because I don't want to spend half my day looking at that shit, because most of it is shit. A cute little yeah, fine, all right. What are you working on? You know? And I don't listen to my phone messages, I should, and I don't read my email, and I should, but, you know, I'm doing other things, you know. I'm trying to get my writings together. In fact, I would pay an intern who would come and help me. But, you know, I've only gone through Morna for that, you know. You know, it's hard these days, I think, particularly, to just invite someone to come in to your house and do things. They have to be vetted in some way. It's like, who do you know? And it's not that I don't want you to do something. You know, this particular thing, being in my house, I mean, this is very intimate for me, you know. And a lot of what I have to go through have to do with people I've been involved with, you know, not just sexually, but, you know, people who are dead, you know, people who've moved away. And some of them I can't remember their names. So, but yeah, I'd like to have help. That would help me. I don't want to watch a lot of TV. You know, I want to do things still. And that's my way of doing things now. You know. I read a lot of queer history because it's out there now. And there are many things that I know, but there's so much I don't know. And I like getting to know it. And then I like, okay, here, you can know this too. You know, you didn't know where to look, you can know this too. And maybe go somewhere with it. Because a number of times I've had people come up to me and said, I saw your article on, I had no idea, you know, just the suffragists in England, for instance, they were more radical than over here. You know, they were clear about class structure over there, you know. And, you know, they did things like put bombs into mailboxes. And someone came up to me, I knew her. She was working at Flying Biscuit, the original one, you know, and she came out in the street and she says, I just want to tell you, I had no idea that they were so radical. You know, I mean, I knew there was suffrage and stuff, and that was great. And it gives you an idea of what you could do. Okay, you don't want to blow up things particularly. Maybe you do, but that may not smooth the way for your intent. But you can do more than just this one thing that you've been told you can do in your life. You can do several things. You can imagine things that you couldn't imagine, you know. Just do that. Think, you know. There are a lot of queer things that are going on in Atlanta, and you can hook into them. You know, there are mailing lists. You know, just, you can't be afraid. Yeah, you are afraid, okay? Nobody really likes entering into something completely different where they don't know anybody. That's not a thing that most people like. But you put yourself out there. You see what people are talking about. You may not talk to anyone in that room for several times, but you may see them somewhere. Say hello. You can't do that if you're just on your computer all the time. And I know you can meet people online, you know, but meet people in the flesh. You can see facial expressions, you know, how people move. So if they're talking one thing but their body says another thing, well, that's information you need. And you can make mistakes. That's the thing. You can make mistakes. mistakes don't necessarily kill you. Mistakes can be growth. And, I've entered into spaces that people didn't really want me. But if I thought I could learn something, I would go. That was October 1979 when about 250, 300,000 queers just set upon Washington. Trying to find accommodation was something interesting. I got the name for, I don't remember her name now. She was a 74-year-old barber, retired. She had barbered on Capitol Hill. And she knew everyone. All the queer guys would come there because they could talk to her. They couldn't talk to anyone. It was, a secret city that, was gay. And nobody could know because your career would be over. I mean, it was the McCarthy era. Your career would be over. You'd be tossed out of your house or your rental unit, Just... So anyhow, Anna, I can't remember now. She had emphysema and she stayed in her house most of the time. But she offered her house for people to stay because that was inviting friends in, or friendly people. We became friendly. Anyhow, you had really just this amazing influx of people. And, there's the Washington Monument, there's the Smithsonian, and they had a group of black lesbians. They were the first in line to enter. And then I was with them. And then I took up a post, really, on the side of the entrance. And this river of people just continually came. There were a number of non-white people from a lot of places around the world, not just in the United States. There were tons of dykes, there were tons of faggots. There were people from, of course, Workers' World, they get everybody, to all the demos. And after an hour, I'm looking back and I can't see the end of the line. And I just had to go on, stop. I couldn't do it. Everything then was working. I didn't have any implants or anything in 1979. And from the stage with Kate Millett and Florence Kennedy and a couple of other women who were writing things and publishing them at the time. And they sang, nothing could be finer than to be in her vagina in the morning. Obviously, being harmonically challenged, I would not be singing that. But anyhow, it just blew my head up. And we were having now a movement for queer rights. We said lesbian, gay, and transvestite because people didn't have the idea of trans yet, but the transvestites were a thing that we do, and they had been at Stonewall, and people eventually were learning what Stonewall was. Now there's almost no one who hasn't heard about it, but it was unclear to me. And we had now a movement for queer rights in the United States and in other parts of the world. And we pushed it, and we pushed it. But AIDS came along, and it derailed that. It changed everything that we were doing. And really pissed a lot of lesbians off because, now, what do? We raise funds. It's for the faggots. We raise funds and it goes to gay men. We raise funds and it goes to people with AIDS. Where are the lesbians with AIDS? Well, there are some, but the kind of sex that we have generally doesn't promote that. Getting the virus, having the virus in your body, and then doing what it does. And I had several good gay men friends. There are a couple of long-term survivors who I know, and one particular I'm getting to know. But they were such an exception to the rule. Those were the days when you heard somebody been diagnosed, and then 2 weeks later they were dead. And in some ways, they were the lucky ones. Because, when you actually are wasting away, either waiting to die, you're going to die, they come up with this drug and that drug, and, it's like putting Drano into you. It's very difficult. And now AIDS shows that it's not a lifestyle, it's a death style. It gave a lot of impetus to people who had come into their own with Anita Bryant. These people organized group against queers. They organized it church by church, meeting by meeting. Somebody comes and talks, and you go to their talk. The same people who were working against abortion, which they continued to work on it through all of the Roe v. Wade and beyond, they also took the stage for this. So it's sex that brings these things together. And when queers don't, and mostly men, don't see that sex is part of queer liberation, queer stuff, that is having blinders on. Educate yourself. These things are not hard to know, not hard to find out. You know how to go online and do it.
That reminds me of something I really want to make sure we talk about is when your friend Charlie, they busted the bookstore he was working at.
God, Christopher's kind.
Yeah.
Well, we have to talk about that.
So what I'd like to do is kind of talk about him, your friendship, what happened there, how unfair that was, and how that incensed you. But then later on, you watched him die, and let's just talk about it.
Okay. I can't even remember when and where I met Charlie. Like, all of a sudden, he's there, And we deeply connected. And sometimes, you click with people. And we had the same kind of sense of humor. And we were both well-read in queer stuff. And he was a feminist. He understood feminist issues. He educated himself. One time, I just decided, I want to have a water feature in my apartment. So I got a kiddie wading pool. And I put water in it. And I was trying to figure out what kind of pump I could get for that size to pump water so the water feature was, working. And I hadn't figured it out yet, but I noticed that my cat, little kitty, liked to lounge by it. She liked the way it felt. So I said, you know, we need to have something that's muy tropical. So I went and bought a potted palm, and I put it beside the water feature. And Charlie came into my apartment, and he laughed so hard that he tripped and fell. He's pounding the, because it's funny. Other people came over and they're like, all right, she's weird, I remember. Charlie did not spend a long time working in places where he paid into Social Security. He did a lot of doing favors and just existing on stuff that he had. And this is before he was sick. Okay. He got a job at Christopher's Kind, which was Jean Loring's bookstore. Now, Jean had it originally in what was the Gay Center on Ponce, next to, I don't know, some fried chicken place. And there was, great hilarity because the sign was next to the Gay Center. It said, "We do chicken right," So he had his bookstore there, and he was really one of the least attractive men you would ever see. But he came on a lot. He came on to people who were just looking at books, And the people at the Gay Center said, like when we moved to our new one in Midtown, we were dropping him. But he had money. He came from money. So he bought a house on 13th Street on the other side of Peachtree from Piedmont Park. And he refurbished it lavishly, and crown molding and, everything gleaming. And they were chairs you could sit in, which at the time was not, you didn't see bookstores with wing-back chairs. And a good-sized counter. And Charlie made sure that there were women's books, feminist books, as well as the other stuff, I looked at some of the coffee table books, which were certainly out of my price range and stuff. It's like, oh, so this is what you mean by a Prince Albert. There's like this huge dick with this, I'm like, I don't know, that looks painful. And I'm never doing that to my clit. Even when it became fashionable. So, anyhow, Christopher's Kind was listed in the white pages. Remember them when they were telephone books? Yellow pages, rather. And you had all these Christian this, Christian that, around Christopher's Kind. And it said a gay bookstore. And it had the address and the phone number. And so they would get these, what would really be obscene calls, like just telling you're going to hell, sometimes showing up. So the Solicitor General or the Nazi in charge of the city, county, I think it's Fulton County actually, was Hinton McAuliffe. And he decided we're going to get rid of any queer stuff and no bookstores of any kind. And he did it. He closed them down. But Christopher's Kind stuck in his craw because it wasn't just like sex stuff. Whereas, one of the other bookstores, places where you go and, would you like to watch a movie? Would you like to have sex? That kind of thing. And all kinds of sexual appliances. Well, Christopher's Kind was not that. But Jean was never there when the police came. And first the GBI came and they said, oh, this is obscene. This is, Prince Albert. This is obscene. And it was such a small percentage of the books, It could have taken those out, but no. So they arrested Charlie. I don't think Gene even made his bail until the next day, He wasn't that concerned. He knew that he would get through it. He's got money, right? Anyhow, so Charlie returns to his post there at Christopher's Kind, selling books, and he likes to help people. He likes to meet people. Charlie was not conventionally attractive. He was tall. He was over 6 foot. He was born with a cleft palate, and apparently it was kind of bad. And when they sewed it up, it was clear that his mouth was not right. I mean, he wore a mustache sometimes and that. But he did have a big dick, and that made a difference at the baths. Okay. So, I don't know. Anyways, he was a great guy, really. And there was a second time that he was arrested. And it was this little pipsqueak motherfucker, Ron Saylor, I think was his name. He was black, and he was working for, he thought, I guess, black news media. And he had these papers that he was like referring to. And he had a guy videotaping, And he comes to Christopher's Kind. He won't go in. And he makes it look very dramatic. And Charlie comes out. It's like, what do you want? Well, what do you think we want? We want to go in there and show people what kind of place this is. You're not coming in here. You're not the police. And this guy is doing this with his paper, like right in his face. And Charlie grabbed the paper, and then he realized that's a mistake. Because that's an assault, right? So he gets arrested. And he said, I can't believe I'm getting arrested again. And Gene does bail him out, before he has to spend the night. But now he's got 2 arrests on his record, for what? And he drank a lot in those days. More than he should, probably, but, he didn't have a lover. He wanted to, but he didn't. Well, he had Rex. That guy, I wanted to open his cranium with an ice pick. You've got something great here. You're such a fuck. But I didn't. And finally he left. But Charlie was bereft in some ways. And then he got really sick. He got that thrush in his throat to where he could hardly get any air down, much just something to drink. But the arrests were before that. And he was drinking, and then he got sick. And then he went to he didn't get sick yet. He went to New Orleans because he wanted a fresh start. He was in a bar, and the second floor was where the owner of the bar lived. Okay, but he went up there, and there was a TV set, and he decided he wanted to watch TV, over here. So he's moving this TV when the proprietor came up, and he's like, "The fuck are you doing?" So he was arrested again, and he was in the jail in the Crescent City. He was there for 2 weeks before he could get somebody to bail him out. I never got contacted about it. I don't know why. And he said what was amazing to him was, lunch was, and sometimes dinner, a bologna sandwich, white bread, and Kool-Aid. And he found that a lot of the guys who had been arrested also were functionally illiterate. So they relied on him to read and write things for them, which he did. And he refused money and things that they wanted to pay him off with, clickers, which we found out was marijuana with a little ammonia, it really gets to you. It's almost like crack. But so finally he came back to Atlanta and he was sober. And life was different, but it still wasn't what he wanted. And then he became sick. That's it. He became sick. He had not been feeling good when he was with Rex. That's what that was. But he hadn't pinpointed it. Who knew? You didn't really know. But yeah, when he got the thrush, that was really bad. And he gave up his apartment because he couldn't, pay any rent. And he, what they call now couch surfing, but, he went to different people's homes. But, that didn't work out. He finally got a place provided by Aid Atlanta, which is good. It was the one that was next to Seven Honda. It's still there. And he was getting sicker and sicker, and I had his medical power of attorney because somebody needed to do it, and he wanted me to do it, so, I did it. And I had to make treatment decisions. I had to decide, could he leave Grady when he was hospitalized or not? He could just sign himself out, but, I'd say, no, I think you really should stay another day or whatever. And that Etc. magazine that I gave you has a picture of that billboard, Gay America Loves You, that could be seen from 75, 85. And it was kitty-cornered a little bit from Grady, and one of his hospitalizations, he could see it from his bed, and that made him feel good. But, he would have explosive diarrhea, just really terrible things. And I came in when he was first hospitalized. I came in and I'm wearing my MARTA uniform. And I had a long braid down my back. And I had all of these things hanging from my belt, my two-way radio with my mic. I had a little pouch that had a day book that I could write in. I had a flashlight, masses of keys. And the uniform was, blue pants, white shirt, and a MARTA stripe, and the last name and initial on the left breast pocket. And I would come in, and I said, I'm his sister. We look nothing like each other, but I'm his sister. I think, okay, And, I'd be there talking to the nurses, and, I didn't realize at the time that what I should have been doing was getting a big box of junk food, and bringing it to them like once a week and saying, with thanks from the family of Charlie St. John, I didn't get that until much later, get that. Anyhow, then I would be on the train, just reading my book. That's usually what I did. And somebody would say, oh, Maria. Oh, okay. yes, I take care of your brother, you know, these lilting Jamaican voices. I said, oh, yeah, great. I'm so grateful that you do that. And they said, well, how is he? I said, oh, he's doing better, you know. Sometimes he wasn't, but not so well. Oh, I'm so sorry, you know, I pray for him. Great. You know, it's like people you don't even know, they're pulling for you. That's great. But it's so weird sometimes. Just somebody out of the blue. Actually, what used to happen, you know, when I was young and hot, was a woman would be exiting the door and hand me a piece of paper. It was her name and phone number. And I put it in my pocket, but, you know, she knows my name, she knows where I work. That's not somebody I can just call. It could be a crazy person. You don't know. And one time, my then girlfriend said, what is all this shit here? You know. But yeah, Charlie got sicker and sicker, and he lost so much weight. And I saw him crossing Moreland Avenue from the Junkman's daughter to the house that the apartment building where he was staying. And he had a decorated walking stick, you know. And he's walking like this. And my God, he looks like a praying mantis, you know. And it couldn't be much longer, you know. It was, which was very difficult. Morna says that she has a sheet of paper where I had written down the days of the week and then who was coming to see Charlie at what time, because he needs to be checked on. And so I would be there early afternoon before I got to work, you know. And I would go Wednesday afternoons. And I would come in and, well, how are you doing? And if he can't get out of bed, that's really bad. He can't get up to piss, you know. And we're mammals. We need to be touched, okay? That's another thing about getting out of your fucking basement, you know. You have to be around people to get touched. And even if it's like, hey, how you doing? That's something. We have skin hunger. And it got painful for him to be touched on his skin, you know. So I couldn't hug him. What I did was I could rub his feet. So I would come in and I would bring, you know, whatever I had made for him. You know, it's like people don't think that I can cook. I can a little bit, so I did. Or, you know, or I'd make a sandwich, you know, like on good bread, you know, different layers of stuff. And I said, this better be eaten. If I have to come here tomorrow, which sometimes I would just drop by, and it's not eaten, and I'm going to check the trash. And you fucking eat that. Like, okay. And cookies, you know, cookies are good. And so I would rub his feet and we would talk. Meanwhile, he had these little stick-ons, you know, like you would put on a file folder to write in what it is. And he had them on every piece of something that he owned. His television, the nightstand, everything. And he wrote people's names on it. And those are the people that were going to get those when he died. So this was a way that he could be affectionate with someone, a way that he could be remembered, and a way that he could have some control in his life. Because otherwise he didn't, you know. He didn't know when he would get some symptom, you know, explosive diarrhea, you know, he can't breathe. You know, it feels like your skin is coming off of your body, you know, all these things. So I did an interview with him. He died in summer of 1991, I think. I could be making that up. I don't know. Anyhow, just about his life. And have a picture of him naked, face down on a rug, you know, like baby picture, and put on Charlie's first taste of beefcake, you know. And 2 weeks later, he died. But the way he died was so horrible. I really had a tough time restraining myself. There were people that didn't deserve it, but I wanted to kill. He called someone in the afternoon. See, I was hard to reach because, you know, we didn't have cell phones. There was a phone in the office, but, you know, I was out doing things most of my shift. And it was Liz Troop and Joy Wasson, who were also primary caregivers for Charlie. And they took him to Grady in the afternoon, late afternoon. And there were no beds. That was before they opened up, you know, basically an AIDS ward. So he was on a gurney with a curtain around him. And they were able to reach me by telephone sometime in late morning the next day. And they said, well, we brought Charlie to the ER. You know, he was vomiting and, you know, whatever else. But we don't know where he is now. I said, what do you mean don't know where he is? Well, can't find him. So I like charge in there and yeah, I'm like, the nurse's desk, where the fuck is my friend? So they put me with a social worker. Nice Jewish girl, you know, just trying to do her job. She, of course, was overwhelmed, you know, with all the stuff that had to be done. And I said, where is he? Is he gone? Where is he? And she left. And I was just... She came back about a half an hour later. And she did this at her desk. Well, he's gone. What do you mean he's gone? He left the building? Or he's dead? He's dead. God damn it. You didn't think to call anyone? Well, we didn't know who to call. I said, I'm on the chart somewhere. I was his sister. You have a contact number. They contacted me. And his friend Dan was there. And he said, so he's in the morgue. He's in the morgue, and they're getting him ready to have a pauper's cremation. That's it. That's the word. And so that would be in a few days. I said, so you're just going to keep him here for a few days, and then you're going to have him burned down to little chips, and then you're going to call me and say, well, they're going to call me and say, come pick him up. That's what you're telling me? Yes. But Dan said, I have to see him. What do you mean you have to see him? He's dead. I have to see him. I can't leave without seeing him. And the lady said, well, you have his medical power of attorney, and you can make arrangements to move the body. I'm like, fuck. So they bring his body up about 45 minutes later, we're all just standing around. She says, "Would you like to sit down?" "No, I would not like to. Thank you." And I said, "I'm sorry. I've kind of been yelling. It's just very emotional. And it's not her fault." She said, "I understand, and trust me, I've had much worse." I believe that. So they bring him, and he's really too tall for the little gurney that they have him on, and so his head and his arm is kind of off, and I'm like, and I just say, "You need a haircut and a shave," because that's one of the last things that he would do. He would comb his hair and he would shave, because that's something that he could do most of the time. And Dan, was holding his hand and rubbing his hand. And I'm like, just don't rub the fucking skin off of it. But so they took him back down, and I say, "So, how long was he on that gurney in the ER where they left him?" She said, "I don't know." I said, "Well, was it on evening shift?" She said, "I don't think so." "Was it midnight shift?" "I don't know." "So you're telling me that he could have been on that gurney for almost a day or a day and a half?" She said, "I'm sorry, I don't know." It's just crazy making. So that was the end of Charlie. That's not a good way to end your life. But that was actually better than some people. He had people who cared about him, people who supported him. I have started going to funerals again because people my age, which is 70, and Chris's age, 74, they're dying. That's natural, you know? It's unnatural for healthy young men in their 20s and 30s to die. We were just so struck by that. It's like they were tossed off of buildings, like it kept coming down on you. And when we did Charlie's obituary in the paper, I was quoted as saying, his close friend, almost a sister, whatever they said this, that, and the other. And a couple of days later, I went to Peachtree City to see my mother. And I said, well, yeah, and I made arrangements for my friend Charlie. And she said, well, I saw that in the paper. And I said, and you didn't think to say anything about it? And she said, I didn't know what to say. I replied, well, I'm sorry is customary, but this is something so different than she was accustomed to or had experienced that it was just outside of her ken, and she didn't get it, So, and that's how our civil struggle was derailed for a long time. Yeah, you know what? Actually, funny story, just different. I was a quality assurance and safety engineer at MARTA. That's how I ended my career. 10 years of that. And I got a phone call from the boss, and she said, well, Buck Worsham, he was another one in our department, but he worked at the bus garage miles from us, and I was on the rail, so I seldom saw him. I mean, I just knew who he was, basically. She said, well, Buck died, and we need people to go to, the wake. Okay. So I want you to go with Ray. I'm like, why? I didn't know him. Just go. Okay. So here's a guy that shouldn't have died, but he had been in Vietnam. He got hepatitis C over there. A lot of guys did. And he had really bad asthma, and he had an asthma attack, and he died. And he was just like 40 something. And he had 2 kids that he and his wife had adopted, like maybe 6, 7 years before that. They were very young. But his wife started taking drugs, how would they put it? And she was ostracized from the family. They weren't divorced, but she lived somewhere else. And so when Buck died, none of his family wanted her to come. But I did my usual, okay, well, this is number 14, Actually, that wasn't number 11, but whatever. And his aunt was stroking his hand, stroking his hand, stroking his hand, and she wanted me to talk to her. So she said, well, that wife of his, I don't know, if she can keep off the drugs, then, So I'm hearing all these things that I didn't particularly want to know, but all right. So his wife comes in, and everyone's like, the knives are out. And so she has to go around the aunt to look at him. And I said, I'm sorry for your loss, because she had been married to him for a while. So she holds my hand, and she walks around with me, the various people and places, because I was the one person who was not judging her. And we were like that for about 20 minutes. And finally, Ray said, well, we got to go. We got to go back to work. And she said, thank you. And she hugged me. And Ray was like, oh, I'm so glad you were there. I didn't know what to say. Guys are like that a lot. I mean, well, it's a natural thing because it's difficult. And I had been at my desk for about an hour. And one of my colleagues who I was friends with, Annette, comes over. She said, you really shouldn't go to funerals to pick women up. Like, what? But, that's how you cope.
Talked about what it takes. Illustration. Okay, while we're on, 2 more things. Let's talk about the quilt and creating the thing.
And what?
Creating the thing.
The thing. Oh, God, the thing.
So, March on Washington happened in the same year that the quilt happened. Is that right?
No.
No, there was another march in the '87, I think.
Yeah, 87 was that march. And that was when we did the civil disobedience. You want to talk about that or
Yeah,
no?
let's talk about that, and then the quilt. And
Okay.
then, so 87.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay. Michael Bowers. Michael Bowers was the Attorney General of the state of Georgia. And they called him the Boy Scout because he was so squeaky clean, just never anything in his past, never anything in his present. He was married to one of those steel magnolias, the whole thing. And there was a guy named Michael Hardwick who wasn't political at all, He was a bartender. I think it was the Cove. So long ago, I'm not sure. But anyhow, he picked up a guy, and they went back to his apartment, and they started having sex in Michael's bedroom, as you will. there was a police officer who had a hard on for him for whatever reason. He had arrested him once. He had come with a warrant, but the warrant wasn't signed, so he, couldn't do anything with it. That kind of thing had a history. And for whatever reason, the front door was unlocked. And the cop came in. And there was a man who was staying there, wasn't even his roommate. And the police officer said, well, I've got a warrant here for Michael Hardwick. And it was actually something that, I don't know if it was a traffic, whatever it was, and he had paid it, but it didn't make it into the system. So it wasn't a legitimate warrant, but nobody knew. And the guy just pointed, okay, because he's like, a cop in the house, oh my God. And the cop goes like this, opens the door, and there's Michael and this guy. And the cop says, oh yeah, you're committing sodomy. And he says, excuse me, what are you doing in my bedroom? So he was arrested and then arraigned and everything. And the sodomy law in Georgia meant that it was very difficult to organize because you have to get rid of the sodomy law. And people had started dying by then. No, they hadn't started dying yet when this happened. But what happened is that people worked on him. This is a really good test case. We're going to make it with this test case. I mean, this guy should not have been in your room, and what you were doing was not public. So, we're gonna bust the sodomy law with this. And he had to be, convinced that this was going to be historic. He was going to be lauded, whatever they told him. And they, meaning, different big shots in the community, lawyers and everything. So we're going to make this test case. All right. So he got a lawyer from the ACLU, and I knew her because I had been on the board of the ACLU for, I don't know, a year or so. And I knew she was good. Can't remember her name. And they took it to the local court, whatever. And of course they said, oh, the sodomy law. Blah, blah, blah. But it went to the Georgia Supreme Court, and the Supreme said, this sodomy law, it's ridiculous, it's archaic, okay, just, we're getting rid of it. And Michael Bowers said, okay, we're not. He took it to the Supreme Court, and the Supremes went mental. If you read the ruling, and there is an appendix to it, but it talked about the Judeo-Christian tradition that law was made from, and it's like, excuse me, separation, church and state, remember? So, that came down, and we had to organize a protest, because you couldn't just let it happen. And we only had 5 months to do it. I'm not sure now why, but 5 months. So all the old war horses that used to organize Pride in Atlanta, we basically were charged with organizing people to get to Washington from the South. Okay. So we had to go from Atlanta to Georgia to the South. We got people there. there was meeting after meeting after meeting, and all these long distance phone calls, and contact this one, da 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 da. And we actually had a conference here in Atlanta. The one, Atlanta, New York, and San Francisco were the main organizing bodies. Okay. And we talked about like what's going on here in Georgia, and people were particularly interested because it was Michael Hardwick and it was Mike Bowers, And so we're just ba-boom, 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 ba-boom. I was working. I worked at that time, very physical work, and this was just exhausting. But we did it because it's important to do it. And we got probably 300,000 people there. And that was the first showing of the quilt. And I still had a press pass from the city of Atlanta. I don't think they really issue it for, like offbeat publications now. So I was able to climb the tower to observe the whole area. And I could not believe how far that quilt extended, just on and on and on and on. And I sat down like, oh my God. And there's more. There are more, and there are more every day. What the fuck are we gonna do? So then I climbed down, and I went just walking around, and I was like, Howard Fradkin, oh my God, he died. Well, he was kind of a slut, but, I think you cannot say that somebody was wrong that they got the virus, Okay, they got the virus, however they got the virus, and what can we do from here? But like Charlie said one time, I used to say that these guys, may God forgive me, they licked toilets. They were such slut. They just are constantly doing it. And, may God forgive me. So there's that. And on Sunday, I think it was, we had training for the civil disobedience. And it was inside a church. They had given it to us in a big auditorium. And many of us had not done CD before, including myself. So we had to be schooled like in the outlines of what you do. And you have to be in a solidarity group. You have to know who's in your group, and you have to know like what you're going to do. And what is your name? So you have to come up with a name. And what's the name that we came up with? Something sluts. I can't remember now. Anyhow, I think there were 6 of us. Yeah. And we went around and got everyone's name, and we said it. And there was a group of men who said it very loud and said, "The Names Project, San Francisco." And so everyone stands up and claps and stuff. Oh, Shameless Hussies. That was the group. Yeah. And so we met at some place and we got on buses. And everyone had to give $100 to the organizers because that meant you could get out of jail. You know, that was your fine. Okay. And so you had to get everyone's name. And it happened to be my girlfriend who got on that bus. Hey, baby, you know. Okay. No, she has to get everyone's name, check it off, you know, get the money. Okay. I said, that's my girlfriend. I said, yeah, she's kind of hot, right? Well, yeah, you know. And so we're driving to the thing, and we get off about a block. We have to walk to the Supreme Court. And then we were just in this big crowd. And there were cops just aligned before the doors and around the portico, you know. And the affinity groups were called by their names. So you go by your names. It was alphabetical. And there were a group of lesbians who wore black robes, like the Supreme Court. In the court of lesbian justice, we find the Supreme Court guilty, you know. It's like, okay. And for whatever reason, I was situated on a step. And at that time, I was 5'8". And now I'm 5'5" because of stuff with my back. But anyhow, tall, dark, and handsome, sure, you know, why not? And then I would say the court of lesbian justice is getting arrested. And it was like, yay, lesbian justice, you know, that kind of stuff. And then when our affinity group was called, we sat down like this before the Supreme Court, and there were all these cops around, and there was this black captain.
Okay, so Hank, that you're in the bus, you're on the bus, and actually what's happening is groups of 7 or so are going on, getting arrested. Then the next group comes on, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Explain that a little bit, and then talk
Okay.
about getting arrested. You know?
Okay. So I've talked about the different groups coming up, and the sizes varied, but half a dozen was sort of what you were in around. Some were larger. I don't think any were really smaller. So, anyhow, I'm standing up there and I'm saying, you know, who's coming, and eventually the Shameless Hussies were called. So we climb the stairs, we're on the portico, like this is where the doors are, and we sit down. And we sit down like this. And one of the police says, if you don't move, you're going to be arrested. Arrest me, I said, arrest me. But I have a bad back, so please let me stand up. So I said, okay. Because, you know, they're tired of it, lifting people, you know. So I was standing, and they did my hands. And then, you know, they picked up the other women and did their hands. One of the women was an act up from New York. And she was not going to cooperate worth shit. So they tried to pick her up. She goes back. They tried to pick her up. She goes back. Finally, the guy took out his stick. He said, you better stand up. She stands up. And we're all zip tied. And now they march us off to buses. Not our buses, their buses, which are not comfortable at all. The Black Dyke police officer at the front of the bus, because you know they have to have somebody to control the crowd, said, "Okay, everybody, I want you to get out of those ties." You know, and if someone couldn't do it because it was too tight, she helped. And they took us to the lockup. I don't know Washington, D.C. I don't know where it is. Not too far from Chinatown, okay? So I could see Chinatown. And the guy behind me was Oscar Wilde. You know, some people gave themselves names. And the woman up there was Nancy Reagan. You know? So I said, "Oh, I got arrested with Oscar Wilde and Nancy Reagan." And people were writing things, I thought, on the wall, saying, fuck this, or, fuck the Supremes, or, we are powerful, anything like that. And so I took out a pen, because I always have one, and it's basta ya, which means enough already. And just at that moment, one of the minions from the jail came by, and Oscar Wilde goes like this, and it's like, "Oh, shit." And he said, "Yeah, I'll remember that." And I'm like, "Okay, maybe $100 wasn't enough." It was okay. Other people were putting pieces of paper that they wrote on and stuck it in the, electrical conduit that was there. Okay. So you go down these steps after standing on them interminably, and there was a guy who was sitting at a desk, and he was completely encased in one of those hazmat suits because, he didn't want to get anything on him. And so he said, man from GLAAD. The cops, they had their blue uniforms, but some of them were wearing brown boots and stuff, and the guys are going, "Your gloves don't match your shoes." Oh, they had white gloves. "Your gloves don't match your shoes." That's the white gloves, and okay. And they're all like, just like, "Hey, fucking faggots." Yeah, well, keep your opinions to yourself. So anyhow, the man from GLAAD asked my name, and he looks at a list, and he says, "Okay, I got your $100, okay." And I went out another door, and I got outside, and my girlfriend was waiting for me. We were with a couple other people. So we had dinner in Chinatown, and then prepared to leave for the next day. And about a week later, I'm having dinner with my parents, and they said, "Well, how was your trip to Washington?" I said, "Oh, it was really great. It was very invigorating. And we did this, and I saw this, and blah, blah, blah." And then when I got arrested, it's like, "Oh, we didn't want to know if you've been arrested or not." I said, "Madre, if there's something you really believe in, you should be willing to be arrested for it. Well, it's not good for you, you have a record. I'm sure I have a record that goes back for many years. Somebody has it. I haven't even tried the Freedom of Information Act because it's just too daunting. Like, fuck it, it's not worth it. Probably now I should do it just to see what it is, but I know I'm there." And one of the best come-on lines I had ever heard was a few months later, maybe half a year later. I was in Boston because my girlfriend then was from Boston, and they had Pride there. And her parents marched in the Pride Parade every year. And so we were there marching, and there was a lot of milling around waiting for the march. And this young lady comes up to me and says, "Wasn't I arrested with you?" Oh my God, yes. So,
Creating the thing, 'cause everybody knows about that. I mean, not everybody, but
well, I was the half of the first same-sex couple that ever went to the Emory School of Medicine. The dinner that they have after it, what's the name of that? Yeah,
y'all sit at the table and
yes, that whole thing. Med school dinner. That's it. Med school commemorative dinner, whatever the fuck it is. Yeah, yeah. So well, Beth called me up and she said, if you don't want to do this, I totally understand. It's great. That's fine. And I said, do what? Well, if you don't want, I said, do what? Because there are a lot of things I'll do. She said, well, I'm graduating from Emory Med School. And I said, oh my God, how great. I mean, I knew she was going, but, that's so great. And she said, yes. And I have been out, as a lesbian the whole time, and it hasn't been easy. Well, I believe you there, honey. So, well, if you think you can do it, I'd like you to be my date. Because that would be the first same-sex couple to ever go to the med school banquet. I said, I'm in, baby. And I still had a black cocktail kind of see-through dress and black heels it's from something from when I was in the Sisters of No Mercy theater troupe, but anyhow. So I said, hey, I can wear those. She said, well, okay. So she's going to pick me up. And she calls me before she comes. She says, if you don't want to do this, I totally understand. Fuck, I'm in, okay? Let's do it. So it's at the Westin, the really fancy one there across from Lenox Square. They have high tea there, all this bullshit. Anyhow, they have the whole ground floor. And there's an open bar. And you go to the bar a couple of times, it's open. And then I would tip a couple of times. And I think I was ordering vodka tonic. I'm not sure. Probably. And the third time that I went to get it, she has it ready for me. I said, well, how'd you know? She said, you're the only one tipping here. I was like, okay. I had been a bartender. I had been a waitress. I get it. So I'm standing. There's the back wall. There's the bar. And I'm just looking at them. So these people are going to be cardiologists and, all that. And most of them didn't look that impressive to me, but, some clearly were ruling class. And, Daddy had been a surgeon and Granddaddy, and, that's all fine. But one woman came up to me. She was gushing. And she goes, holds my wrist and goes, I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad you're here. I was like, well, thank you, because I'm her date. And she gushing at me means she's not a homophobe, Like, right. So eventually we are going to go to the dining area. And the dining area has these massive round tables, okay? And you can fit, I don't know, 20 couples, something. 17, 18, 20 couples, whatever. A lot of people. And every other table is man, woman, man, woman, man, woman. And Beth has us sitting next to her friends. Like, these are two people that she was friendly with in med school, right? So you have man, woman, woman, woman. And the program is going to start shortly. Nobody was at our table. Like, they filled up every other table. Right? And I'm like, and this guy who she knows comes by, and he's wearing a kilt, and I've had a lot to drink at this point, which I don't do now, but I did then. And I said, you know, I've always wondered what you guys have under those things. What do you wear? He says, nothing. And I reached up and squeezed his butt, and I said, well, that's true. Beth is like, and he said, you know, you're the first woman with the tubes to do that. And I said, breeding tells, you know. Anyhow, the program really is going to start. There are people at the podium, you know, and they seated 3 couples across the table from us. Not one time during this whole program did they look at us. And I said, well, this is going to be a handy skill when you're a doctor. You know, like, don't look at anyone. And I was like, oh, dear. Plague time. I mean, plague, you know, whatever. But Beth said, when they start doing jokes about Midtown, we have to leave, okay? Because, you know, it's faggotry. So, just all of this stuff. And everyone's drunk. I mean, everyone's drunk, practically. There are a few who hadn't been drinking, but not many. And the people at the podium are drunk, for the most part. And so they're saying just, you know, almost unintelligible shit sometimes. And other people were like, hey, cool. And then they started with, you know, how can you tell someone's a fag? By the crown molding, the height of it, you know. It's like, oh, this is really funny. So she said, let's go. Okay. But, oh, I forgot about, they all were eating these beef tornado, you know, like, make sure you had beef and then potatoes and stuff. Well, that was on the menu, and the gal who was coming around, I gave her 3 ones rolled up, and I said, "Did you get me a veggie plate?" "Oh, yeah." I got a good veggie plate, you know. But, yeah, I had eaten most of it, and Beth said, "Oh, we gotta go. So, okay. You know, and that was just fun. It was just fun. See how things were. But that's it. First same-sex couple, Emory Med School banquet.
I just know you were dying to tell them off. Tell yourself. Okay, let's talk about your shirt.
Talk about what?
Shirt.
Oh, my shirt. Okay. Oof. Target, as we know,
Sit down for a second.
has these pop-up stores in June. And they used to have them in practically every Target store, but now there's been so much pushback, they don't. However, last year, I bought this one, which, as we know, looks like the inclusive pride flag. And the label says Pride with the symbol for Target. Can you see it? Okay. And I got this in Brunswick, Georgia, which is kind of redneck down there. They had a really respectable pop-up store there. And you could tell by the time I got there, a lot of the merchandise had been picked over because there were empty spaces where you could tell things had been hanging, you know. So I bought a couple of things. And the next year, which was last year, I went to the pop-up at the Target around the Marta Lindbergh station. And I bought like $250 worth of shit. Some of it, you know, I had no use for because I wanted to support this. It was starting to make some waves about having these. And I bought like oversized t-shirts with hands on it with pride nails. I donated it to Lost and Found, you know, stuff like that. Caps. The jackets were a little too expensive. Socks. Tray, you know, that kind of stuff. But this year, I have not gotten it together, just doing other things. So tomorrow I intend to make a little raid, see how it goes. Particularly in the South, there has been trouble with this, you know, because evangelicals or whoever would come up and really harass employees about it. Well, it's not their fault. I did notice that the items I wanted to purchase just because I wanted them, there was a tray with sayings in Spanish, okay? And there was, I don't remember, not an ashtray, but, you know, something, you know, platter that had a lot of little pride flags, you know, on it. And I bring it and all this other stuff to the cash register. And there are no price tags on these two. So I said, you know, like, tell me how much it costs. Now, a lot of times at Target, if there's no price on it, they'll give it to you. Or they'll say, well, $5, you know, whatever. The young lady called her supervisor over and said, well, what about this? So apparently something had gone through, I mean, whatever. And she said, you know, she had the scanner, it wouldn't scan. She had the scanner, it wouldn't scan. She said, well, we can't sell that. I said, just give me a price. I'll buy it. $20, $30. We can't sell it. I said, because it's in Spanish? She said, no, we just can't sell it. Well, I have all this other shit I want to buy, and there's a long line. So, all right. I had to let it go.
Oh, I could talk to you for hours. Actually, I do